Hello and welcome to the Business of Authority. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And today we ask the question, how do you know how much is enough?
One of the reasons I love this question so much is that there is no one right answer. Like if you put 100 people together and ask them the question, I guarantee no two people will say the same thing.
Right. Yeah. And even how to figure it out would be different. Like how much is enough? Like the actual amount is one thing, and then how to figure it out is another. Because everybody's in so many different situations, financially speaking, and just general life, that it's a highly personal answer, process and answer. And I'm acutely aware of this at the moment because I've been writing about a sort of related topic of lifestyle inflation on my mailing list in the Ditcherville comic this weekend, and I'm getting all of these replies that are from different perspectives, of course. Like some people are just like, yeah, but what about people who are living on minimum wage, or what about this, or what about that, or just completely resonating with them. They're like, oh, God, I feel so seen, or like wrestling with this right now, stuff like that. What if I have kids and all that? And I mean, if we talk about enough in terms of, if we talk about it just to begin with, in terms of financial, business, if this is for, people listening here are probably soloists or small firms, and they are business owners, and they have, I would say, generally speaking, a lot more control over what their income looks like in any given year, more so than someone who's trying to climb up a corporate ladder, for example.
Yeah.
Like people like us can really step on the gas if we have a slow quarter or something.
Yeah. Or we can take our foot off the gas.
Right. So the question is like, how do I know when to take should I just keep the gas pedal matted to the floor the whole time? Right. Because that's the possibility exists to just mash that pedal to the floor until you burn out, or until you decide it's enough, right? Like you hopefully, if everything goes well, you have to decide when to take your foot off the gas. Otherwise you'll just go, screaming off to the horizon and, at breakneck speeds. So at a certain point, you have to think about this.
Well, and what happens a lot in my experience is that we go past enough to too much. And then we're spending time like rolling it back, like dialing it back. What do I have to do so this is enough? Not too much, not too little,
right.
Goldilocks, just right.
Yes. But here's the trap, right? Not but there's a trap there that I see lots of people fall into, at least Americans, where you zoom past enough. Now you've got extra, more than you need. And so your lifestyle increases, and once you increase your lifestyle, that becomes a need. It feels like a need because nobody wants to lower their lifestyle.
Right.
So once you buy that new big house, wow, I had a great year. Let's upgrade to the big house on the corner. And now that's a tough decision to undo. It becomes easier to, wait for it, step on the gas and make more money. So it's this kind of arms race between your desires and your income. And since we have so much control over our income, more so than a W-2 employee, it's not an impossible path to be like, oh, well, really want to take the kids to Disney, really want to upgrade the house, really want to put a new roof on the garage. I'll just make more money. And it's kind of like you end up working, you can end up in this trap where you're the gilded hamster wheel, where you're working like a dog to support a lifestyle that is always, it's like chronically on the edge of what you can afford.
Yes. Yes, that's a really good way to describe it, because it's never enough. And it's not even that we sit there and go, oh, what I have isn't enough. It's just, ooh, look at that.
Yeah.
what if we had that? What would that be like? I don't think I like to think that our listeners are not like, blindly grabbing for the next thing. But, you see things like you're in a neighborhood and all of a sudden everybody else has a new car this year. Everybody else has a new, in California, it would be like about the wall around your property or the garage door, right? The $50,000 garage door. So, yeah, I mean, what's that expression? We covet what we see.
Yeah. And around in my neighborhood, there are a lot of the big sort of corporate employer around here is CVS. And you can tell when bonuses go out because everybody's got a new BMW or Mercedes or whatever. And so there's the keeping up with the Joneses thing. But there's also I've been working so hard. I deserve this trip to Paris, or I deserve this whatever fancy car, So it gets into this. I mean, personal finance is not really territory that we get into too often, but I think this is specifically around business owners who do have a lever that they can push to increase their income, to get these things they think they want, which then turn into what feel like needs. And anyway, so that's the subject. So like, how do you get to the place where you're like, no, I'm good. This is enough in terms of money to get stuff or lifestyle stuff or whatever. Because for me, I feel like this boils down. I'm trying to think of anything this boils down to other than lifestyle inflation.
Oh, I think it's more than that.
Like what else will cause you to never think enough is enough?
Well, some people are driven internally by voices from their past, right? My dad said I'd never amount to anything, so I've got to do this. Like, look at the race of the billionaires. Like, who's going to go to Mars first?
Okay, yeah,
right?
That is a good one.
Who has the most toys when they die? Like, all those things. And I'm not saying that's our audience, but I'm saying there is that thing out there. But I think the way that I'm kind of thinking about this, and we don't usually talk about things this way, but I think there's a personal box and there's a business box. And what happens because we own businesses and we have personal lives is that they intermingle so much a lot of times. And yeah, we may have, financial structures or legal structures in place to separate business from personal. But for most of us, our personal desires drive what we will do in our business. Sure. And so it's almost like if we can go through the exercise with our partner or with our families on, what personally is enough, and then you can, I don't like the term lifestyle business, but you could define your business in such a way that it allows you to do that. So just as an example, let's say you sit down with your spouse and you decide that you're really working too much. The idea of going out on your own was that you were going to have more time to do some fun stuff, let's say in the summer as a family. And so you agree, you know what? I'm going to take a month off in the summer, or I'm going to take every Friday off, whatever that looks like. And maybe you take a hit in income, maybe you don't. Maybe you do something differently and you wind up making more money when you're working less. But you kind of go through that exercise. And I think sometimes we don't go through that exercise. We just say, well, I made $100,000 at my other job, so I have to make $100,000 here. And until you make that first $100,000, you feel like you're in a deep hole.
Right.
So we don't have those discussions a lot of times.
Right. So the success metric is this number when the real, in the example you just gave, the real success metric is the number, but the story we told ourselves about going solo was to have more time with the family, let's say. Mm-hmm. But so there's like a disconnect there in that particular example. Yeah. And like I'm like looking for an example from my life. Any longtime listener of the show knows that I'm really into not working that much in terms of stuff not stuff I don't want to do, but stuff you have to pay me to do. So like there's a bunch of stuff I do that some people would categorize as work that I do not categorize as work, like this podcast, like my other podcasts, talking to smart people about fun stuff. To me, I just can't force myself to categorize that as work. There are, emotionally demanding aspects of coaching people that I do have to consider work. It's, stuff that, I need to be paid for because it takes a lot of mental effort. It's stressful. And you're delivering, transformations to people is valuable to them. Anyway, the point is that I'm probably pretty far on one end of this spectrum in terms of, I would say for the past six years, I've had a pretty good de facto definition of what's enough in terms of finances, annual income, that kind of thing. But still, I always want to make more than I did last year. There was with one exception. One year I was made a decision that I knew was going to be like a 20% hit, and it was almost exactly 20% hit. But other than that, other than making a strategic sort of business model change, I don't like the feeling of not hitting that previous number, even if even if my, one of my success metrics, let's say, is that I was very happy with the number of hours I spent doing things that I would consider work, the hard stuff on my income projection spreadsheet. So there's just more than one thing that I look at, I guess. And one of them seems really artificial. The numbers one seems really artificial.
But we're entrepreneurs and we look at those and then it's like we're American. Sometimes I think that's our problem is we're American and we look and go, okay, let's be competitive. How did we do last year?
Yeah, to me, it's not a competitive thing. It's a canary in the coal mine thing. It's like, wait, did I hit the top?
Oh, okay. Is it all going to go away?
Right.
Oh, okay. That's a very real, like, existential fear.
Right. So it's more like that. It's not a competitive thing. It's like it's more like it's a harbinger of doom potentially. So it doesn't feel good.
Okay. So for me, it's competitive. I like to with myself because I don't compete with anybody else.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I like it to be bigger than last year.
So I've been getting a lot of one of the threads that I've been getting in the replies was about what you just mentioned, which is the United States thing, where, one of the people asked, I said something like, I was talking about the arms race of like, oh, I make more money. I've been working so hard to earn this money. I deserve to blow it on stuff that instead of putting it away for a rainy day or whatever, it's like, finally I can get that Rolex that I've been promising myself or whatever. And the question was, do you think this is just a U.S. thing? Can you imagine it being can you imagine what would it take for that to change in the United States? And I was like, I don't know, like maybe Buddhism becoming the predominant religion. Like I have no idea what could change that about the United States culture, that kind of competitive entrepreneurial,
It comes from within too. I mean, yes, we're obviously we're affected by what we see and the ads around us and social media, all the beautiful shiny things on Instagram. But I think, a lot of it too is our own relationship with ourselves and our stuff. And that's complicated. I don't think that changes in a generation or two.
Yeah,
even,
it starts to,
sadly.
It taps into status, which is, I don't know this, but I have to imagine that that's not a U.S. thing. That feels like an evolutionary thing. Whatever the status symbols are for the particular culture that you're in, I feel
go back in time to any culture as far back as you can possibly think of. And there was always something. We had kings, we had royalty, we had, certain color feathers that you could wear that indicated that you were a better warrior.
Right.
Or you had a different headdress or footwear or waistcoat. I mean, it's been around forever, as long as people.
Right. So I can think of a few though, where there are these visible status symbols that don't cost money. So things like physical fitness or in martial arts, the color of your belt, like the black belt thing originally came from, everybody started out with a white belt, and the more you got thrown on the ground, the dirtier it got until it was black. And so that doesn't cost you any money.
The history of that. Well, that's a very cool thing.
Right. It's just a dirty belt from doing the work. So that's, but I would agree with you that that I'm just like scanning over sort of historical trends that I'm familiar with. And a lot of them are money related, income related,
Yeah, it used to
flashiness.
be being fat was a status symbol
Right.
because it meant you had enough money to eat well.
Right. Yeah. So, other than raising the topic, other than calling attention to the, oh, you've been working so hard, you deserve it, and like spontaneously buying stuff off of Instagram ads or whatever, then, so I think awareness, of course, is the first step to be like, oh, do I really want this? And there's all these tricks that I do think work. I said it in kind of a dismissive way, but they're just so almost trite. It's like, put stuff in your Amazon, put it in save for later, or put it in your cart, but don't buy it for 24 hours. Anything that you want to buy, wait 24 hours, all of that stuff. And I think
Well,
that probably works.
I think I would come at it more from the ground up. So maybe one way to think about this is I mentioned before, like two boxes, like there's the personal box and the business box. And there's so many personal finance gurus. I mean, pick the one whose advice you want to follow. But one of the ones I really like is I like what Ramit Sethi has to say about cutting your expenses to the bone on things that don't matter to you and spending lavishly on the things that do. And he has a system where on how you send your money and where, so that that assumption means that you're saving long-term, like for retirement investment. Shorter term, maybe you want to have a child or you want a big wedding, or you want a big travel, those kinds of things. So when I think there is a definition of personal basic enoughness for people in our kinds of work. I mean, I'm not saying this about everybody because it's not accessible for everybody.
Right.
But ideally, you've got, whatever enough money is, right? You have money so there's a roof over your head, you're fed, you're warm or cool enough. You can save some for retirement, college for your kids, to give to causes that you care about. Have an emergency fund and have some of the right kinds of insurance so you protect yourself. Like I think of that as sort of the basic. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't put like a number on that. Is that 75,000? Is it 100? Is it 500? I mean, it's whatever number you want to put on it, right? But having those other things too. So if you're making, let me just dial back for a second. Back when in my big firm days, I worked for with one of the big universities, and they had these medical professors. They were doctors, but they were also on staff, and they got just salary. And some of these folks were, and this is quite a while ago, were making just south of $500,000, and they had no money. Like they spent every single cent. And some of them even had housing as part of their, allowance. And it's so that number needs to be what you want it to be. But even if it's $500,000 or $1 million, you still want some consistency in how that money comes in. You want to have an emergency fund if something happens, like a pandemic. You want to have the right insurance. So if your spouse gets hit by a bus, you're going to be able to get them the health care they need and the rehab they need to come back. Like it's having all of those things, whatever the number, it's having all of those things. And then it's having that conversation, that really hard conversation with your partner, if you have one, about what that looks like for the two of you together. Mm-hmm. And I think it just gets complicated. Like when you have kids, I have clients who have kids in private school, and that's not negotiable. Like that's part of their expenses. And so You and I could go, oh yeah, just, homeschool, send the kids to public school. But if you're paying, $50,000 to $100,000 a year after taxes for tuition, your enough number is a heck of a lot higher than ours is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, the number is going to be totally different for everyone. That's no doubt. The thing that I find the most interesting is the blindness to the concept, and it comes from once you have stuff, then you've got this. I mean, it's a psychological phenomenon. I forget the name of it, but it's like endowment bias, I think, where stuff you have is worth more to you than you would pay for it if you didn't own it. So
Oh.
you see this all the time with like people who, want to sell their 72 Camaro for $10,000 and like nobody's willing to give them more than 1,000. and in fact, they wouldn't buy it for more than 1,000 if they didn't have it.
Right.
And so personally, one thing about me that is unusual in my experience is that I am really, really conscious about increasing some aspect of our lifestyles, because I know that becomes the new normal. And there's basically no going back short of a major life event, like downsizing the house because the kids are going to college or something, or like a health thing, like you said, or like much later stage life, hopefully much later stage life stuff. So I'm really, so for an example from the recent past, if you were on my mailing list, it was probably 2018, 2019, I was writing a lot of articles about luxury wristwatches.
I remember those.
Yeah, a friend of mine had gotten me into it. I got sucked into it, and I started to develop a sort of taste, not an aficionado, but I started to develop a taste for watches. I started noticing them all the time, like in public. I'd notice people's watches, and I could tell a cheap one from an expensive one, or a junk one from a nice one. Or I'd be like, oh, that guy's cool. He's got a SKX 007, like I started to, I was just in the beginning of turning into a watch guy. And I caught myself on like the Rolex site one night late being like, this is the one. This would be totally reasonable. Oh, I know. It was in 2019 because I almost bought myself a Rolex when I got my black belt, and the story I was going to tell myself, the story I told myself I would tell people when they asked me about the watch, and this was barely conscious, was like, oh, it's a Rolex, but I got it as a present to myself when I got my black belt, and then I wouldn't be douchey for having a Rolex.
Well, I was actually equating the emotion of it, which is, it felt like a positive thing. If you can afford the watch and you want the watch and it marks something, but that was just a story.
Right.
You were telling yourself, not the reality.
Well, I think all of it's a story. So it's just a story inside of a story.
Yeah.
So, it was a wake up call. I was like, this doesn't end well. This turns into me having a $100,000 collection of watches. And if that meant I had to work like an extra hour, it's not worth it. Like if that meant that
life energy.
It's just like, it's Gazinga's pin, a $10,000 Gazinga's pin, or 30,000 or 100,000. And I was like, and so I had to consciously make myself not a watch guy anymore. I unsubscribed from the daily mailing list. I got rid of all the books. I'd gotten a whole bunch of books for Christmas, watch books for Christmas people gave me. I got rid of all that stuff, and that was it.
That's an abstinence. Like, keep
Right.
it totally away from me. Because
Right.
I think, when we moved to Palm Springs, I'd always been interested in design, but my leanings were mostly more like European, and then it's all modernism here. And I've studied it now for like 5 years, and it's fascinating, but I don't have the need to buy like a $30,000 console to say that, oh, look at this, this name brand within a very, small little design world. I do love looking at them. And I love seeing when they come on and seeing, like, what are they priced at an auction site? What do they go for? So, it's interesting, but it's not something that I have to own myself.
Right. You can appreciate it without owning it.
Yeah. And I think, that's what I learned from, you mentioned Gazinga's pin. That's from Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robbins and Joe Dominguez. He's deceased, but Vicki's still talking about it and has written a follow-on. It's like Gazinga's pins are things that you just buy and you almost unconsciously, like you go to the store and you see a pink t-shirt and you're like, oh, I need one in every color. Like my Gazinga's pins are books. When BookBub sends me that list every day, pretty much every day I'll buy at least one book. And since I don't read a whole book every day, I have quite a collection of things I haven't read yet. So it's being conscious of what we do. And if we can rewire it, which is what you did. I mean, I'm actually really impressed that you were able to do that. That's unusual for a lot of people. It's almost like you said, oh, this is an addiction.
Right.
And so I can't gamble anymore. I can't drink anymore. I can't do drugs anymore. Done.
It was weird. And here's the thing. Here's how the thing that I had to do was not expose myself to it anymore. So like I've said many times to people about, I don't have, because a lot of people think I'm really disciplined because of the karate thing and the daily email list and all that. And maybe I am. I don't feel that way though. I just feel like I'm smart about it, where like I make it easy for myself. Like I am very disciplined in the supermarket, but I'm not disciplined at 11 at night next to the Oreos. Right. But I won't buy the Oreos. I'm smart because I know if the Oreos are in the house, I'm probably going to eat them.
Yep.
But if
they call to you.
Yeah. But if they're not in the house, and that's a much easier decision to make. It's like, I definitely don't want them right now. So why would and I know I don't want to eat them later. Mm-hmm. So why get them? Right. So it's like, sort of like just awareness, self-awareness or self-knowledge, where it's like, well, if these are in the house, it's danger, Will Robinson. So instead of even being tempted, I'll just avoid the temptation. And that's what it was with the watches. I had to avoid the temptation.
Yeah. And
developing a taste, honestly, we could probably debate this, but developing a taste in anything is very dangerous.
You know who else wrote about this? Actually, Ramit wrote about this recently because somebody asked him, like, how do you, because he has some high-end things he likes, like cashmere anything, and big, long, expensive, activity-laden trips. And they're like, so how do you, I think one of his money rules is any flight over 4, 5, or 6 hours, you go business class. So they're like, how do you know that you can do that and like not like suddenly have to give that up, and then it's painful versus never having had it at all.
Exactly.
And what he said was, it depends on the thing, but one of the things he does is he tries to make sure that there's enough money to do whatever it is for at least 2 years. Figuring, you can always make more money, right? So he said, so if it's like a big thing, like it's a house, then obviously that's going to require a lot more. But if it's, buying cashmere, what did he say he bought? Like cashmere, like running pants or something, or lounge pants, like something, I just imagine it. Well, hey, we all have the things we love. So, like it's a couple grand to buy something like that. So he's like, so, you don't do that until you know that you're okay otherwise. So there are some things you can do. I think the thing that strikes me though is I like to think of it not as like punishment and having to take something away, but choosing very carefully what we welcome in.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that way it feels more abundant versus punitive. I never do well with punitive stuff. Like, I'm impressed you could do the watch thing. I would have had a hard time doing that.
Well, if I had bought one, it would have been a different story. I was right at the edge. Yeah. So, I mean, I bought some, $400 or $500 watches, but I didn't get into 4 figures or 5. So I'm terrible at belt tightening. Terrible. I'm like not one of those, just skip one latte a week type of people. But from it's more at a macro level for me, where I could see, like I said, people were starting to know that I was becoming a watch guy, let's say. So they started giving me watch related presents and stuff.
Oh yeah.
And so then it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling, it turns into an identity, which we've talked about recently.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really don't like stuff. I mean, I moved across country or down, all the way down from the Northeast to the South in a 2-seater. Like I don't have stuff. I don't like stuff. I don't like, what is it? A Buddha thing? Like each of my possessions is but a stone around my neck. Like I feel that. So when I start to develop,
I love that you're married to a maximalist.
I know. When
you
she
two balance each other out.
When she moved down to join me, once we bought the house, it was like a gigantic moving truck. Right. So
I know opposites attract.
yeah, if I had stuff, we need a bigger house. So, but I just don't like, I feel like it owns me. I like the feeling of like, God forbid, if the house burnt down, there's nothing I would miss. There's not a thing in here that I couldn't replace tomorrow. With very rare exceptions. And one of them was my 40th birthday present. And the other one is like just a beautiful guitar, but I could replace that too. It's nothing, there's no story behind it.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be expensive. I mean, we have insurance. I mean, I'm just not nostalgic about things. So when I find myself developing a taste, it's really that. Like I drink cheap beer, I drink cheap wine. I just don't see the point of teaching myself that it's bad. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's good enough. It doesn't need to be $100 a bottle. But if I started going to wine tasting and becoming a wine guy, it would taste bad, So I don't know if I'm just,
or you could become, it's really interesting because what I'm hearing is like, you have this, it's all or it's nothing. Right. And so you could be a wine connoisseur who doesn't have to spend $100 a bottle because you can appreciate that there's one that's, I don't know, 18 that's really good from an up and coming vintner. I don't know. But yeah, this is so fascinating listening to how you think about this. And that's kind of our point, right? Is everybody thinks about this a little differently. You're saying, I don't want to get a taste for certain things. And maybe that's also another way of saying, those things don't really matter that much to me, or I probably would.
Exactly.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's really what it is. It's almost like out of boredom that I would develop a taste in watches or a taste for wine. It's just like, it would almost be out of boredom. Yeah. I don't really care. I don't care. I
just read something recently, and I can't remember if it was in like a novel or a nonfiction book. And they said something like, we spend most of our early lives, and by early, they meant like to maybe 50, acquiring. And especially if you have kids, you have a house, you have a bigger house, and then the kids move out and you start deaccessioning, right? Yeah. So we spend most of it acquiring, especially, and when I say acquiring, I mean people on the upper income spectrum. And then we spend the next part deacquiring. Yeah. We get rid of stuff and it's more open and it's all of a sudden it's quiet. You get a smaller house. And so I think some of that happens. It's almost like we're on autopilot sometimes. I know plenty of people who aren't, but who are on autopilot when you're raising kids, because you have a society that you're living within.
Right.
Like my brother-in-law, where they live, everybody has 4 or 5 bedroom houses, and their kids are all grown but one, and they just bought a new 5-bedroom house. I'm like, why do you want a 5-bedroom house? There's no kids here. Right. Do you really need 5 bedrooms? But it's kind of the norm.
Yeah. Well, the story they tell themselves is like, well, when they come home for holidays, we want a place for everyone to,
I know. And they'll have kids and want this, and again, that's all fine. I'm not poo-pooing the dream. Like, that's his dream. That's what he should have. He can afford it. Great. Enjoy the dream. But let's just be conscious about what the dream is, I think.
Yeah.
Now, ironically, this morning, I read in the New York Times, I was reading a really interesting obituary. I don't always read them, but this one was. And I've never heard of him before. His name was Charles Feeney, and he was a gazillionaire. I think he died in his early 90s, and he was the guy behind the duty-free shops at all the airports. He invented that like back in the 50s or 60s. And so sometime in the late 90s, he decided that he wanted to give all of his money away while he was alive. And he and his long-term wife, who was the mother of their, I think, 5 children, they divorced in the 90s, and he gave her all the houses. They had like 7 houses and some kind of a settlement. He supposedly gave settlements to each of his kids, in line with their expectations. He said it was modest. Who knows? Who cares? And then he remarried, and he decided, I'm going to start giving this away. And he did most of it anonymously until there was some kind of a disclosure requirement when he kind of got outed that it was him. But he kept something like $2 million for himself and his wife. He only flew coach. He sold his airplanes. He sold his limousines. He sold the houses that he had reacquired. And they lived in a a small, modest apartment in San Francisco and literally gave it all away.
Yeah.
And so I just think how hard that would be, to your earlier point, to go backwards. And the reasoning in the obituary was that he had grown up in, I think it was New Jersey, in a working class Irish American family. And he said, I want to be able to face the guys that I grew up with. I want to have those values. I want to be a good guy. I don't really want to be the guy that is, acquiring all the toys. And I mean, if you haven't, I would recommend New York Times, Charles Feeney obituary. What a story.
Wow.
So my point in all that is, it kind of doesn't matter where you are. We're always thinking about this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to tap into something you mentioned earlier about the sort of phases of life, because I think that's one of the other threads that came in on the list when I was talking about this stuff. And looking at my own life, I did a little napkin math while I was in these conversations, and my baseline financial requirements in my 20s were X, and now in my 50s, 30 years later, are something like 20X. And
that sounds about right.
Part of that is a function of, I lived on $200 a week, and one winter lived in a van. So, I was like, my income, like I could get by on almost nothing. And there's some macroeconomic inflation type stuff in there, but the vast majority of that increase is directly related to decisions I made about how I wanted to spend my time. Getting married, having kids, having dogs, the neighborhood we moved, all of these things, buying houses, all that stuff. And it really was my 30s where the S curve really took off. I went from, I don't know how old I've been, it doesn't matter, late 20s, early 30s. I was about, it would have been 2003, so I was 31. And for like that year through, basically my 30s and into 40s, before we had kids, our first was born when I just turned 41. That 10-year period, it skyrocketed. I mean, we were both working, no kids. Erica had a great job. She was making more than me. And we were just like, oh my God, the money we would drop in Nordstrom on shoes, or like eating out 5 nights a week, and, you name it.
Well, yeah, the party continues forever.
Yeah. We never got into cars. We never got into boats or other sort of toys that would be the kinds of things that you would acquire in that phase. But then, like you said, once kid number 1 was born, there became a new gravitational pull in the family unit, and radical behavior change in terms of daily routine. Erica left the corporate life and, stay-at-home mom. So like huge, like lifestyle change. So that's one of those things I said before. It's like, you're probably not going to go backwards or even flatten out unless there's some big life change. And, then we had a second, and it really, 40s to 50s, it really didn't really change that much. It hasn't really changed that much.
You lived in the same house that whole time?
Yeah, we've been in this house 16 years, and we'll die in this house. Like, we're not moving. we've come close a couple of times, and both times we were like, thank God we didn't move.
Yeah. Well, no, because that's one of the things sometimes people do is they get a bigger house, and then that kind of skews things. But yeah. We had a neighbor that kind of did that, and they made this move, and they made it really complicated because they made it contingent on the sale of their existing home, which is almost unheard of in a hot market. But they got the deal. And then, but they had it was like literally like 3 different parties. There were 3 different houses that all had to close on the same day and move and like all this stuff. And luckily they figured out how to do it in cash, so they didn't have to deal with the crazy interest rates right now. But that was the other unknown over their head. And the stress load, I mean, I was just watching it, and I really felt for them. I'm like, is there not another way you can do this that would be less stressful? Yeah. So, yeah. And I'm not saying never move. I mean, I've moved way more than the average bear. I kind of do love to move. But Yeah, I mean, I think it's about finding that place where you have healthy stress. Like healthy is like, all right, this is where I want to take myself, my business, my clients, my family. That's healthy, I think. Like thinking about that and it is a good thing. But being reactive and creating unnecessary stress, I mean, it seems like that's the advantage we have of having our own businesses. Like we don't have somebody else trying to pull our strings saying, oh, you need to transfer to Scranton tomorrow.
Scranton.
Apologies to anyone who lives in Scranton. I've never been there. I'm sure it's lovely.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess the message of this episode is to be conscious and aware of your spending, really. I mean, it's like what you're choosing to spend money on. I mean, none of it's an asset. Even your house isn't an asset. Like I like the guy, what's his name? No, it's not Guy Kawasaki. I can never remember the guy's name. Rich Dad, Poor Dad author.
Oh, Kawasaki.
It is Kawasaki? Okay. So
no, Kiyosaki.
Kiyosaki, thank you. And he's like, if your house isn't putting money in your pocket every month, it's not an asset. And you can argue that, and I understand the arguments, but I think it's a really good point, which is, because you can tell yourself like, oh, this is a smart purchase. Everyone says you should buy a house. But like my super rich uncle, when I was thinking about buying a house the first time, he's like, look, I said, I feel like I'm throwing my money away on rent. Everybody says I'm throwing away my money on rent. He goes, look, if you want a house, buy a house. If you don't want a house, do not buy a house. Because you might be throwing your money away on rent, but you're going to be throwing away on repairs once you own the place. So, it comes back to the kind of the Ramit thing, where it's like, know what you really love, what you really value, and know what you really don't. And don't fall into this trap of like, oh, I need better. I need a better one of these. And
even if you do go for the better, make sure that you've got the things I talked about earlier in that personal box put together. You've got some income coming in that's relatively stable, right? You've got you've got an emergency fund. You're saving for the future. Then you look at what's left and you say, yeah, I can afford this. Go for it. But again, it's for our own definition of peace of mind and security. Somebody else might have to have, in fact, I have clients who need very, very big cash amounts in their bank accounts to feel safe. And that's all again, this is 100% personal. It's what makes you feel safe. And then you can decide, what's enough.
Yeah. So then, we've said repeatedly, your number is going to be very different from my number, Rochelle's number, or the person next to you's number. But being thoughtful about it and coming up with some sense, it doesn't have to be exact number, but coming up with some sense of like, okay, you're looking at the dashboard, everything's in the green, you can take your foot off the gas and maybe not have to drive yourself working 60 hours a week, let's say, or even 40. I mean, get down to 25, get down to 20. Why did you go solo? If you're going to work full time, why not put all the risk on your employer and go work at Google? Why not? I mean, obviously I know the reasons why not, but
notice I was silent. No, we all know.
Yeah, we all know the reasons why not, but surely some part of you, and when I pulled my list, this was the answer, was that they started their businesses, people on my list started their businesses for some version of the word freedom. And that meant more specifically like control over their calendar so they could kind of have a better life-work balance, call it a lifestyle business if you want. I don't like that. That term is used pejoratively, but I don't know why. I mean, like, what the hell else would you, I mean, your mission, of course, but like, anyway, it's like have some sense of what's the dials, at least the dials on your dashboard that you're looking at. Like with me, it's like number of hours I spend working every week and sort of year over year income numbers. And I also look at like my email list subscriber count because that's a leading indicator. Those are basically the three things I look at. And then, personal stuff. So at least know what your dials are and then say like, okay, which one's the biggest dial? Like which one's the most important to me? What's your speedometer or what's your gas gauge? Not to extend the metaphor too far. And then start to be like, okay, at what point could I take my foot off the gas or improve one of these numbers, perhaps at the expense, or maybe not, at the expense of one of the other ones? Like, what are the trade-offs if I make this decision?
Well, there's also a qualitative piece in there, and I think because there's been a lot of conversation in my group lately about letting certain clients go. It's also the quality of your time. Like, are the people that you're serving, or do they inspire and energize you? Or are they draining you? Like, are you having fun? And I mean, sometimes, like when you say, take your foot off the gas, the foot off the gas could be, you know what? It's okay. I'm going to let this client or that client or both of them go. And I'm okay with the hit to my income because I'm going to find somebody better, which happens 99% of the time.
Yeah.
But then you've got that freedom to say, yeah, I don't have to carry this thing on my back to feed my family or myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we've been jabbering, I think, about it. I think the point has been made.
Yeah. It's just spend time thinking about what is enough and what is enough today, what is enough tomorrow, and what is enough for the future that you're designing for yourself.
Yeah. Cool. All right, folks. That's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And we hope you join us again next time for The Business of Authority. Bye.
Bye-bye.